we talked about the birther movement before, the white racial anxiety is acute. People hear that. People respond to that. You know, Romney had this ad during the campaign saying Obama wants to remove the work requirement from welfare. You remember that ad? Right? This was the ad that he ran more than any other. And while he was saying that, you saw these images of hardworking, blue-collar white people. Right? So what is the message? That the black president wants to take away your hard-earned dollars, you blue-collar workers, you salt of the earth, and give them to lazy blacks who won't even have to work for them. And that sort of message resonates, and it's been part of the GOP's message for decades now. People understand that. You don't have to scream it. You can say it in this dog-whistly, subtle way, and people understand what you're talking about. Those sort of attitudes are consistently transmitted through the right-wing media into the voters. They want to hear their anger answered by their politicians and their candidates, and they respond to it. So that's part of why we have politicians, especially on the right, becoming more and more radicalized, going more and more right-wing, the Tea Party dragging the party further and further rightward, outside of the mainstream. Going to have them try to return from that just to get to a place of sort of moderation where they might be able to be acceptable to a lot more people. Otherwise, they're going to have a hard time in national elections. Some of you might say, well, what about Congress? Well, we have districts now that are gerrymandered, and people sort of choose to live among other people like them, so sort of self-gerrymandering. So it seems that it appears that the House of Representatives will remain in the structure that it's in for quite a long time. So we're sort of stuck in the system of a Senate that is close with a Democratic lead, and a House that has a fairly strong Republican lead majority, and then the White House is the tipping point, and quite consistently it's been a Democratic White House, and perhaps into the future. Turning the table a little bit, one thing I noticed also is that the Obama presidency does not do, it does not change everyday life for black people. I think some thought maybe when he was elected it would make a difference, but it really doesn't. I think there is a profound sort of spiritual impact of the Obama presidency. I talked to a lot of people who sort of cried on the night that he was elected, feeling like, wow, I feel welcomed into America. I feel fully American for the first time in my life. Because I think as black people, we feel tied to, proud of St. Louis, or East St. Louis, or Oakland, or Atlanta, or Harlem, Brooklyn, wherever you may live. But patriotism with America is much more fraught and complex, because America has hurt you in small and large and direct and indirect ways. So we have much more difficult time relating to America. The Obama election made that much easier. But is there a sort of direct day-to-day change in our lives? Do Trayvon Martins still happen? Oscar Grants still happen? There's a little girl in Detroit whose name is escaping me, killed by the police. Those sort of things still happen. Not talking about the girl who got shot in Chicago last week, talking about a 7-year-old girl who got shot by police a couple years ago. The impact of the spiritual awakening of the Obama election is going to take years to unpack, but the day-to-day change in American life for black people is not happening, and it's not going to happen anytime soon, because you can't change the structural problems of America with just one president. We still have substandard schools. We still have an unemployment rate that is double the white unemployment rate, and has been for 4 or 5 decades. We still have a situation where studies show when a black person goes to apply for a job, their likelihood of getting hired is equal to that of a white person who has a felony conviction record. Right? Obama can't just come and change that. We have median wealth in the black community that is a fraction of the median wealth in the white community. And this is to say nothing of what happens when we start talking about the war on drugs, right? And how black and white people use and sell drugs at nearly identical rates. The we are far more likely to be arrested. When we are arrested, we are far more likely to be prosecuted. Prosecutors have total discretion on who they choose to prosecute and who they do not. Right? And there's no oversight over that. Consistently, white kids from the suburbs or what have you, they get arrested for a bag of weed and they're given a second chance. The black kid is not. And when we are prosecuted, we are more likely to be convicted, and when we are convicted, we are more likely to get longer sentences. So there's this way that the war on drugs sort of sucks us in and doesn't really let us go. And all these things are structurally in place, right? It's not always that everybody is sort of putting in racist things and saying we're going to screw the black people, but there's ways that these advantages of whiteness and the disadvantages of blackness accumulate over and over. And it's not just through our lives, right? This is going back generations that this happens. Some of the older people around here in this room will remember in the 50s, the Federal Housing Administration wanted to make it easier for Americans to own their homes. So they passed out thousands of loans for Americans to become homeowners. 98% of those loans went to white people. So what did that do? That made all these white people able to buy homes, and we know that intergenerational transfers of wealth are a huge marker or predictor of you being wealthy. If your parents own their own home, they are more likely to have money to be able to help you pay for school, get that first down payment, which is a really big hurdle for a lot of people, or start a business, or maybe all three, or two of those three. When your parents can help you get into wealth, then you have a far greater chance of that, right? If your parents own a home, you're more likely to end up owning a home. Very few people in the black community have that, and part of those advantages, and part of that goes back to, from the Federal Housing Administration, that they weren't giving us loans, and there's hundreds of examples like that. And the white people might say, hey, I'm not racist. I didn't create that system. Well, that's absolutely right. The people who received those loans, they weren't racist, but they are dealing in a system of white privilege where they were able to benefit from being white, even without being racist. And they might say, well, hey, I worked hard for that. Well, I'm sure you did. I'm sure that you took the advantages of being white and you worked hard. No one's saying you did. But there's this consistent way that the advantages of whiteness accumulate over generation after generation, and the disadvantages of blackness accumulate. This doesn't mean that nobody can succeed. Of course, certain people are able to break through the system. We all talk about Oprah and Eric Holder and Valerie Jarrett and these sort of people, these individuals, right, who pop up in small ways and break through the system. Sure, that's going to happen, but the vast majority of us are not able to do that. There might be white people here right now saying, well, you're not be able to access white supremacy or white privilege in the same way. I understand that, but that certainly doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. The advantages multiply for most people. I want to go back to the war on drugs for a moment, talk about that a little bit before we start talking about questions which you guys want to talk about. But I had actually a really interesting conversation with brothers and sisters from the Black student group beforehand. One of the things we did not talk about, we actually had a great conversation about Django, which I want to expand into this one. One of the things we didn't really get into is talking about hip-hop and its relationship to the war on drugs, which I find a really interesting lens on the black community and the ways that we deal with our own oppression, right? Because I've been talking a lot about how we are oppressed, but how do we deal with that oppression? And just one sort of example of that you can see through the lens of hip-hop.